The sun had barely started peeking over the horizon when Jake Thompson's old pickup rattled down the cracked asphalt of Main Street, the kind of street that used to be buzzing with mom-and-pop shops and weekend foot traffic. Now, all that was left was the eerie quiet of a town that had been asleep for too long, except the quiet wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of silence that made your skin crawl, like something was just waiting for you around the next corner. Jake squinted through the dusty windshield, gripping the wheel so hard his knuckles were white. He was on a mission, and missing a beat now could get him bit, or worse. Behind him, his buddy Ricky Lawson rode shotgun, chewing on a straw like he'd done 1,000 times before. Ricky's laid-back grin was gone, replaced by a tense set to his jaw. "Man, you sure this is the place?" he asked, eyes darting to the burned-out gas station to their left. Broken windows gaped like dead mouths. "Looks, quiet," he added, though neither of them really believed it. Jake didn't answer. He just tightened his grip, recalling the news clips, the rumors, the panic spreading faster than wildfire on a windy day. The whole thing had started a week ago, first a few strange stories from the other side of the state. People disappearing, some turning up dead in ways that didn't make sense. Then the authorities got involved, trying to say it was some virus, some biological accident, but no one was buying it. Folks were saying the dead weren't staying dead. That people were walking around, hungry for flesh, like some sick joke come to life. Jake had laughed it off at first, until he'd seen his neighbor, Old Man Jenkins, stumbling around the backyard, arms flailing, growling like an animal, eyes milky and empty. That's when it hit him, the world had gone sideways, and he needed to get out while he still could. He slammed the brakes when they reached the corner of Pine and 3rd, kicking up dust that hung in the air like smoke. "This is it," he said, voice low. Ricky leaned forward, peering at the crumbling brick building ahead. Used to be a hardware store. Now, it was their target, a stash of supplies, maybe some weapons, anything to keep them alive another day. Jake had scavenged maps, heard rumors from truckers, checked empty houses. This spot had promise, even if it reeked of old blood and mold. As they slid out of the truck, Jake noticed movement near the alleyway, a slow shuffle, dragging one leg like someone had been shot in a horror flick. His stomach dropped. "Shit, we got company," he muttered. Ricky turned, eyes wide, spotting the figures as they emerged into the light. They were thin, hunched, skin pale as ash, eyes glassy. And then they moaned, a wet, guttural sound that made Jake want to throw up but didn't let him move. "Back," Jake hissed, pulling Ricky behind a dumpster. They could see the crowd now, a small group of them, dragging themselves along with more determination than they should have had. Jake counted 6, maybe 7. Not a lot, but enough to make a mess of their day. Ricky fumbled with his backpack, digging for anything that could be used as a weapon. He pulled out a rusty pipe and looked at Jake, face pale. I ain't ready for this, man." Jake smirked despite the fear. "Ain't nobody ready. But we gotta move, or we die here." He checked the back alley for a clear path, spotted a dumpster they could hop over to reach the hardware store's back door. Step 1, distraction. Step 2, grab what we can and get the hell out. Easy, right? Ha. He grabbed a brick, wound back, and lobbed it down the alley. The clatter echoed, loud in the morning air. The zombies turned, drawn to the noise like moths to flame. One of them let out a blood-curdling scream, and that was all the opening Jake needed. He grabbed Ricky's arm, pulled him toward the dumpster, and together they jumped, hearts pounding. Inside, the hardware store smelled of rust, mold, and death. Shelves were knocked over, glass shattered. Jake and Ricky moved quickly, scanning the aisles. Nuts, bolts, canned goods, but nothing that screamed weapon, except maybe the garden tools section. Jake grabbed a heavy wrench while Ricky clutched a shovel, and they started scooping supplies into their backpacks. Time was short, they could hear the shuffling outside, feel the menace creeping closer with every second. And then the first one hit the window. The sound of cracking glass made both of them freeze. Jake's heart slammed in his chest as a skeletal hand reached through the broken pane, grasping at the air like it could grab their souls. Ricky screamed and swung his shovel, connecting with a sickening crunch. The creature fell back, but more were coming. Jake kicked a shelf toward the window to slow them down, but he knew it was temporary. They had to move. "Back door, now!" Jake yelled. They bolted, shoving through the narrow exit into a side alley. Outside, the sun had fully risen, revealing more of the nightmare that had swallowed their town. Cars abandoned in the streets, doors hanging open, and shadows moving where shadows shouldn't be. Every step felt like a gamble with death, every noise a warning that something hungry was just around the corner. They ran, ducking behind cars, jumping over fences, hearts pounding in sync with the chaos around them. Ricky stumbled, cursing, and Jake caught him just in time. "Don't stop!" Jake barked. They made it to the edge of town, breathing hard, legs trembling, backpacks loaded but barely alive. Then came the sound, a low, guttural moan that wasn't like the others. Deep, resonant, and terrifyingly intelligent. Jake froze. Ricky grabbed his arm. "What the hell is that?" Jake shook his head, chest heaving. "I don't know, but it ain't normal." He looked toward the distant tree line, where a figure emerged. Bigger than the rest, moving with a jerky, unnatural grace. And it was heading straight for them. Ricky gulped, eyes wide. We gotta get out of here. Now." Jake didn't argue. He kicked his truck into gear, tires spinning in the dirt, and they tore down the road, leaving the small town behind, hearts pounding like war drums. Behind them, the moaning grew louder, more coordinated, like the dead were learning. The world was changing, and they were smack dab in the middle of it. As they sped down the highway, the morning light reflecting off the cracked asphalt, Jake glanced at Ricky. "Man, this ain't just a few crazy zombies. This is the end of everything we knew." Ricky swallowed hard, gripping the dashboard. "Yeah, and I don't think anyone's coming to save us." Jake nodded grimly. He knew he was right. And somewhere deep down, he knew this was just the beginning. The real fight, the one for survival, for sanity, for keeping what little humanity they had left, was about to start. And in the shadow of the apocalypse, they had to fight, or they'd be next. By the time Jake and Ricky finally slowed the truck near the outskirts of what used to be Miller's Creek, the sun was high enough to burn off the morning fog, but the world still looked dead. And maybe it was. Their truck rattled over potholes like it was coughing up its last breath, tires squealing against the cracked asphalt. Jake wiped sweat off his brow and glanced at Ricky, who was pale as a sheet and clinging to his shovel like it was a life raft. "Man, we need a plan," Ricky muttered, voice shaking. Jake didn't answer at first, eyes scanning the horizon, looking for anything. A safe place, a sign of life, even a bird flying somewhere that wasn't already dead. But there was nothing. Just silence, broken occasionally by distant moans that crawled into their brains. Finally, Jake spoke. "We head for the old mill. Heard some truckers say there's a cabin back there, stocked with supplies. Could be our best shot." Ricky nodded, trying to look brave, but his hands were trembling. Yeah, sounds good. If it ain't crawling with those things." Jake gave a short, humorless laugh. "Ain't no telling, so we gotta be ready for anything." The road to the mill was rough, overgrown with weeds and debris. Cars were abandoned everywhere, doors flapping in the wind like ragged flags of warning. At one point, they had to swerve around a pile of bodies stacked like garbage bags on the shoulder. Ricky swallowed hard, eyes wide. "Dude, that's messed up." Jake didn't reply, just drove. The only sound besides the engine was the distant groans of the dead, like an orchestra of nightmare, growing louder as they approached the tree line. As they neared the cabin, Jake slowed, heart hammering in his chest. The place looked abandoned, boarded-up windows, a sagging porch, but there was smoke curling from the chimney. Someone was there, and whoever it was might not be friendly. He parked the truck behind a fallen tree, motioned for Ricky to stay low. They crept up the path, sticks snapping underfoot, each crack of wood sounding like a gunshot in the silence. When they reached the porch, a voice called out, rough and cautious. "Who's there?" Jake froze, then stepped forward slowly, hands raised. "It's Jake, me and my buddy Ricky. We're, survivors." The door creaked open, and a man appeared, broad-shouldered, beard scruffy, eyes sharp. "Name's Marcus," he said. "You better not be bringing trouble." Jake shook his head. "Just looking for shelter, and maybe some supplies." Marcus studied them for a long moment, then nodded once. "All right, come on in. But watch yourselves. They're everywhere out there." Inside, the cabin smelled of wood smoke and old canned beans. Rusted tools hung from the walls, and the floor was littered with crates of food and water. Jake and Ricky let out a breath they didn't realize they'd been holding. "Man, this could actually work," Ricky whispered, eyes wide. Marcus snorted. "Don't get too cozy. You ever been around a horde? One mistake in your lunch." They spent the next few hours fortifying the cabin, boarding up windows, stacking crates, and setting traps outside. Marcus taught them how to listen for the subtle signs, the shuffle of a foot that didn't belong, a distant moan that wasn't random. By the time night fell, they were exhausted but prepared, or at least as prepared as anyone could be in a world gone mad. The first attack came just after midnight. Jake was on watch when he heard it, a faint scratching at the back door, then a low, guttural growl. He grabbed a baseball bat, signaling Ricky and Marcus. The door rattled as something pounded against it. Jake swung, hitting the creature through the cracked wood, hearing a sickening thud. But there were more, always more. They fought in the shadows, sweat mixing with blood, hearts pounding in a rhythm that was half fear, half adrenaline. Ricky managed to stab one in the neck with his shovel. Marcus used a hammer to crush another's skull. They were winning, barely. When the fight ended, the cabin was a mess, blood smeared on the floorboards, the walls scratched. The moaning outside faded into the distance, but the damage was done. They'd survived, this time. Jake leaned against the wall, chest heaving. "We can't keep doing this," he said. "We need more people, more weapons, a real plan." Marcus nodded grimly. "Yeah, but finding the living is worse than fighting the dead." Days passed. They scavenged nearby towns, avoiding hordes, taking what they could carry. Along the way, they found others, some scared, some desperate, some dangerous. There was Lisa, a nurse with nerves of steel who could patch up wounds faster than anyone Jake had ever seen. Then came Trent, a mechanic who knew how to rig cars to explode, and Keisha, a sharpshooter who didn't miss. Together, they were building a makeshift crew, a ragtag band trying to claw their way through a world that was hell on earth. But the dead were evolving. They noticed at first on a supply run, zombies that could run, that coordinated attacks, that weren't satisfied with just 1 or 2 kills. Entire streets were crawling with them, moving like a pack, hunting. Jake and the crew realized the rules had changed. The apocalypse wasn't just here, it was learning. And if they didn't adapt, they'd be gone. One night, around a campfire far from the cabin, the group argued about what to do next. "We can't keep hiding," Lisa said, voice steady but eyes burning with intensity. "We need to hit a real stash, find weapons, maybe even take back a town." Trent shook his head. "And get ourselves killed? No thanks." Keisha scowled, resting her rifle across her lap. "Then we die anyway. Might as well fight for something." Jake stayed quiet, weighing options, heart heavy. He knew one thing: they couldn't stay in the shadows forever. Survival was temporary, action was the only way to change the odds. And that's when they heard it, a sound like a roar, low and echoing through the valley. Not a moan, not a shuffle. Something else, bigger, smarter. The group froze, staring into the darkness. "Oh hell no," Ricky muttered. "That ain't normal." Jake gritted his teeth. "Pack up. Move out. We're going to see what's coming." They ran through the night, sticks snapping underfoot, hearts hammering. Ahead, the dark shapes of zombies were already converging, but the sound behind them grew louder, more terrifying. When they finally reached a clearing, they saw it, a horde unlike any they'd faced before, hundreds of the dead, moving fast, some dragging the fallen, some sprinting with terrifying precision. And in the middle, a giant, twisted figure, leading them like a general commanding an army. The group froze, realization sinking in. This was it. The real battle for survival. Not just running, not just hiding. Fighting, strategizing, and staying alive meant everything. Jake clenched his fists, looking at his friends, all of them tense but ready. We don't get out of this by thinking small. We fight. We adapt. We survive. Ricky swallowed hard, gripping his weapon. Then let's make sure they regret it. And as the first wave hit, screaming and snarling, the fire of determination burned brighter in the human hearts. The apocalypse wasn't finished, but neither were they. By dawn, the valley was a nightmare painted in gray and blood. Smoke from burned-out cars curled into the cold morning air, and the stench of decay was thick enough to taste. Jake, Ricky, Marcus, Lisa, Trent, and Keisha crouched behind the shattered walls of an old warehouse, eyes scanning the horizon. Hundreds of undead were advancing, moving faster than anything they'd faced before, some staggering, some sprinting, all relentless. And at the center of it all, the giant twisted figure loomed, a monstrous, terrifying leader of the horde. Jake swallowed hard. This ain't no ordinary fight," he muttered. "It's everything we've got, or we're done." Ricky adjusted his grip on the pipe he'd scavenged. "Man. I knew things were bad, but, damn. That's insane." Lisa loaded her rifle, calm but tense. "Insane or not, we've got to hit them hard, hit them smart, and don't let them surround us. If they swarm, we're dead." Trent tinkered with a makeshift explosive strapped to his backpack. "I got one shot at this. I make it count or we're screwed." Keisha scanned the massive movement, eyes sharp, breathing steady. "We fight from the sides. I take the high ground. We take out as many as we can before they reach us." The first wave hit fast. The undead crashed through the perimeter like a storm, groaning, snapping, hungry. Jake swung his wrench with every ounce of strength, smashing skulls, ducking sharp claws. Ricky fought beside him, swinging his pipe, adrenaline fueling every strike. Marcus used brute force, bashing skulls with hammers, clearing paths for the others. Lisa moved like a ghost among them, precise shots taking down fast movers before they could get too close. Keisha rained bullets from the warehouse roof, taking careful aim at the more dangerous ones, especially the runner zombies that had learned to coordinate attacks. Then came the leader. The massive, twisted figure charged with terrifying speed. Jake and the crew barely noticed it until it was almost on them, its clawed hands ripping through metal and wood like paper. Marcus yelled, "Back up! Don't let it corner us!" They scrambled, barely keeping ahead of the monstrosity, hearts hammering like war drums. Trent knew what had to be done. He dove into the middle of the chaos, yanking a wire and triggering the explosives he'd rigged earlier. Fire and smoke exploded, taking out dozens of undead and throwing the leader off balance, though not down. Jake knew this was their shot. "Now! Take it!" He grabbed a heavy chain hanging from the warehouse ceiling, swung it like a bat, hitting the leader square in the head. It staggered, snarling, jerking violently, but didn't go down. Ricky joined, swinging his pipe, then Marcus with a hammer. They weren't just hitting it, They were fighting to survive, to keep everyone alive. The leader fell once, twice, but every time, it got up again, relentless. Lisa and Keisha worked together, covering angles, keeping the smaller undead at bay. "Jake!" "Left side!" Lisa shouted. Jake spun, swinging, connecting with the leader's twisted jaw. Ricky jabbed at its stomach, finally causing it to stumble backward into Trent's trap, another explosive, smaller but enough to knock it off its feet. Smoke and debris filled the air, but the leader was down, and the rest of the horde hesitated, confused by the sudden chaos. The group didn't wait. They pushed forward, striking with everything they had, using traps, fire, and raw desperation. The undead fell in waves, and for the first time in days, the human survivors could see hope. Sweat and blood dripped down their faces, their bodies screamed in pain, but they moved as one unit, each strike fueled by the will to survive. Hours passed like minutes. Dawn became full morning, and the horde, battered and broken, began to scatter. Jake, chest heaving, looked around at his friends. They were bruised, scratched, exhausted, but alive. The leader lay motionless, finally defeated. Silence fell over the valley. The smell of blood hung heavy, but the immediate threat had passed. Jake turned to the group. "We did it, somehow." Ricky let out a shaky laugh. I can't believe we're still alive." Marcus, covered in blood and sweat, nodded. "We survived because we had each other. Don't forget that. We're stronger together." Lisa checked her rifle, then Trent, then Keisha. "We've lost people before, but this proves we can fight back. We can survive." They didn't celebrate. Not really. There was still a world out there, filled with death, chaos, and the undead. But for the first time since the outbreak, they felt something dangerous, hope. They had fought, adapted, and lived to tell the tale. They were tired, battered, and scared, but they were still human. And in a world overrun by monsters, being human was the most powerful weapon of all. As they gathered their gear, Jake looked toward the horizon. Smoke rose from distant towns, and groans echoed faintly through the valley. The apocalypse wasn't over. But they were ready. Every scar, every wound, every night spent hiding in fear had prepared them for this. They were survivors. Fighters. And they were determined to carve out a life in a world that had tried to take everything from them. Ricky nudged Jake, smirking despite exhaustion. "So, what's next, boss?" Jake smiled grimly. "Next? We keep moving, keep fighting, and keep surviving. And one day, maybe we take back everything that's ours." The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows over the ruined valley. The horde was gone, for now, but Jake and the crew knew it was only a matter of time before the next wave came. And when it did, they'd be ready. In the shadow of the apocalypse, humanity's resilience burned brighter than the darkness that tried to swallow it. And as long as they had each other, they'd fight. They'd survive. They'd endure. Because that's what it meant to be human in a world overrun by monsters.